Well, hard act to follow. I'm not young, but I remember being young. Charlie Bast warned me not to give you a Jeremiad. And I said to him that I wasn't going to do that. Chicago has already won too many Jeremiahs. So he also told me not to waste your time. Let me begin simply by pointing out the one fault in Charlie's introduction, namely that the ruling class very much includes the academic folks who have instructed it. It is that academic ruling class is simply one component of the ruling class. Well, I'm going to tell you four things. First, I'm going to tell you that every society that has ever been has had some element which has set the tone for the rest of it, and how important that tone-setting ruling element is. That it makes a big difference what kind of tone is set for any given society. Then I will describe our ruling class, which is a very special kind of ruling class, how it came to be in America, how America, which is a country founded on the notion that all men are created equal, came to have a ruling class, how that ruling class, what the parts of that ruling class are, what it is that animates them, how they perpetuate themselves, how they rule. Then I will describe a little bit what they have done to us, what they have done to our habits, how they have transferred their vision upon us. And finally, I will discuss what we might be able to do about these things. So first, the fact that our society's tone is set by certain people is not at all remarkable. Plato described the Athens of his time as first Pericles writ large, and said that all societies are the writ large version of the persons most prominent in them. Then he said that after Pericles, Athens became the sophist writ large, and its fortunes declined. Aristotle went farther and explained that a society ceases to be what it is when it acquires a new element that sets the tone for it. Just as a comic chorus ceases to be a comic chorus when it begins to sing a tragic tune and tell of tragedies. The substance of what is sung makes an enormous difference. We all know that we all studied in school that George Washington made an enormous difference in what America became. Think of all the choices that Washington had to make, and realize that he made them with a view of how that would affect not only people around him at the time, not only the character of America at the time, but what precedents it would set for Americans who would follow. The moderation, the self-restraint of American government reflected the notion that all men are created equal. That notion would not have effectuated itself, would not have been real, had not George Washington embodied it. Think how different Bill Clinton was from George Washington. Think of Clinton's behavior and realize that what was so important about his behavior was not so much that he did what he did, but rather that that a substantial portion of the American people approved of it. Now, Bill Clinton set a certain tone for America, which has continued and which continues to develop in its own character. America really is not, well, it was Bill Clinton writ large, and now it is, well, who is it that American men now seek to emulate? Is it Obama? Is it Michael Jackson? What is it that a young man, an ambitious young man, is going to do in order to realize his ambitions, his dreams? How is he going to become wealthy and famous? What paths will he take? What behavior will he consider appropriate or not? Certainly not in the year 2015. He will not think of behaving as George Washington did. He will not think of Washingtonian probity. He will think more of, well, behaving, if not like Bill Clinton, certainly by a moral compass very different from that of George Washington. Not hard work, not responsibility, but quite something else. Now, how did America acquire its current ruling class? How did American elites give up the notion that all men are created equal? Well, quite simply, the notion that all men are created equal is a hard one for leaders to hold on to, because, first of all, powerful men know that, and women for that matter, that others are less powerful than they, that there are enormous differences between human beings. And so they look for reasons to explain that, for ways of explaining that. Soon after the era of the founding, biology offered an explanation for that. Animals could be improved by breeding. Some species were better than others, were stronger than others, more apt than others. And the best scientific journals were teaching that, in fact, all creatures, all races are unequal. And even within a race, there are all sorts of breeds that are better and worse than others. This was scientific opinion. It was because of scientific opinion that, for example, J.C. Calhoun ceased being a Jeffersonian Republican and became a principled defender of slavery. It was because of the belief in moral superiority, in a kind of inbred moral superiority, that a whole bunch of Yankees came to think of Southerners as Southern slave masters as inferior beings. We tend to look at the coming of the Civil War as simply a conflict between good and evil. In fact, it was a conflict between two kinds of imperialisms, one a racial one and the other a kind of moral imperialism. The moral imperialism triumphed on the field of battle. And thereafter, America saw an explosion of confidence on the part of prominent men, confidence that mankind could be improved, regardless of what mankind wanted, could be improved if only mankind were made to follow certain recipes. The Woodrow, in the 1880s, the most touted book, the most prominent book in America, was something called Our Country. It explained how America could, in fact, create a new race of men, not simply a biological race of men, but a new moral race of men through political, social engineering. The author was named Josiah Strong. In the same year that that book appeared, Woodrow Wilson published his book, Congressional Government, which was the first book ever published in America which argued that the founders were wrong, had been wrong in limiting government. Woodrow Wilson explained that government had the chance to make America enormously good and powerful, and wealthy, and the arbiter of all good things, the harbinger of a new era. And we ought to be doing exactly that. This new class of people believed that they were the rightful rulers of the country. In the early 19th century, late 19th and early 20th century, this class's view of itself and of its relations with lesser Americans became ever more prominent. The Chautauqua movement, what does that mean? Well, today it means NPR. You want to understand what the Chautauqua movement was like? Just think of NPR today, the kinds of messages that NPR puts out. This is the mentality which, by the 1920s, led the American Civil Liberties Union to sponsor and to publicize the Scopes trial, which in fact was instituted to ridicule the notion that there was any explanation for life on Earth and for the nature of man other than evolution. Any notion of divine design for humanity, any notion of natural law was simply to be laughed at. And those who were to be laughed at, were to be considered unfit to run their own affairs. This class came into government power under the Roosevelt administration. I will not go beyond now the details, except to point out that this class believed that decisions ought not to be made, decisions about national policy, decisions about how we ought to live, ought not to be made by people's representatives, by people influenced by voters. Rather, they ought to be made by technocrats, by the best and the brightest appointed officials. Government was to be a technical function fulfilled by administrators rather than politicians. Today, we no longer live in a republic in which the laws are made by legislators. They are administered by elected presidents and governors and administered by impartial judges. No, we live in a society where the rules are made, administered, and adjudicated by unelected bureaucrats. The so-called independent agencies, by the way, are by no means independent, and they consist of its appointed officials and of all of the private parties that they bring into their ambit. The decisions made by these administrative agencies are arrived at in consultation with favored private parties. Now, what is this ruling class? This ruling class consists of the administrators and the private parties they bring in to work with them. In fact, there is very little distinction between the administrators and their favored private parties. What is it that animates this ruling class? What is it that gives them authority? Well, of course, they are given authority they are given political authority by Congress, which has largely abdicated its functions. And the same thing, by the way, goes for state legislatures. But the psychological, moral, intellectual driving force of this ruling class is this very distinction between that they make between themselves, who are the worthy ones, the ones who know, the ones who have the secrets to the scientific secrets to doing things the right way, and everybody else who does not have these, who does not have this knowledge. This supposition of knowledge wholly negates the notion that all men are created equal. Now, I will stress this point once more. If, in fact, if it were possible for the judgments of these rulers to be challenged intellectually, substantively, if it were possible to show them, to challenge this decision substantively, to say, no, this is wrong and that is right. No, there is a better standard than the one you're using. Then they would be engaged in a political contest. That is to say, they would have to persuade the persons who object to them. Persuasion is the way that equals rule equals. It is the way that equals deal with equals. That is persuasion. But the administrative state does not rule by persuasion. It rules by decree. This is how our ruling class rules. It also rules by drawing, by the goodies that they hand out. Look, as a professor for many, many years, I had students coming to me and wanting to study with me. I would have to warn them that I could not open to them the doors of the agencies. I could not open to them the ladders into the ruling class, and that if they wanted an easy road up, they should not study with me or with anybody like me. For better or worse, many of them decided to be my students. But what I said to them was entirely true, that the ruling class draws people onto itself by the goodies that it gives out, which explains also why the ruling class transcends the Democratic Party and includes a very, very substantial part of the party that is supposed to be in opposition. You may recall that in 2010, after the Republicans party took the House, and a substantial number of those Republicans were sponsored by the Tea Party, the Trent Lott, who had been the Senate Majority Leader, blithely told the world that, oh, this is not really a problem. We're going to tell these folks who have come in here on which side their bread is buttered, that their bread is buttered on the side of the establishment, on the side of the ruling class. They'll come along. They'll play ball, just like everybody. Well, so that is the attraction of the ruling class. What has this ruling class done? What has it meant to the rest of America? Well, it has affected the way that we make a living. I have a son who is a lawyer, and he wanted career advice from me. He wanted to, of course, I had given him advice before. I told him to study constitutional law and to fight the machine. No, he wanted money. Money. So I said to him, look, I'll tell you what I've told all my other students. If you want money, the way to do it, very, very bright young man. He also has good, sound scientific knowledge. Look, why don't you go to work? Not only knowledge of science, knows finance. Kids, National Merit Scholar, brilliant kid. So look, you can do anything. Go and work for either the Federal Reserve, if you want to play finance. Go to work for the EPA, and then go to work for a law firm. Your salary will be many times higher than if you simply work in corporate law or ordinary law practice. This is how you do it. You work for the you do what the French call pantouflage, which means walking back and forth with slippers. So you don't have to put on shoes. You don't have to walk on the street. You can, without putting on your shoes, you can walk between the public sector and the private sector. And at each transition you make, your wealth increases exponentially. So we do that. Who is it that people really would want to, who really want money, want to imitate? How about Elon Musk? Why? Is anybody who does not know the name Elon Musk? You don't know. Elon Musk is the king of lithium-ion batteries, which are supposed to be the savior of the planet, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he is supported by the government. He is one of the alternative, probably the principal beneficiary of the alternative of the government's craze for alternative energy. Problem is that people who think that their batteries are electric batteries are some kind of magical solution neglect a simple fact of physics called conservation of energy. All of you who had high school physics may remember that every time you shift from one form of energy to the other, in other words, if you take electricity, go into batteries, and then from batteries go to electricity and then to mechanical energy, you have lost energy, you have transitioned your energy 3 times, and you have lost about 30% each time. Now, so in order to embrace the ethos of regulatory, of getting wealthy in a regulatory climate, you have got to forget about what is right and wrong by nature, and you have to simply figure out what is right and wrong in terms of government favor. What else have they taught us? Well, they have taught us that there's such a thing as protected classes, that we are not all equal, that some of us have rights that others do not have. Some of you, maybe the oldest among you, will remember that in 1964, when the Civil Rights Bill was enacted, some people asked or remonstrated with Hubert Humphrey, the sponsor of the bill, saying that these anti-discrimination provisions would in fact result in preferential treatment for blacks and for others by extension. Hubert Humphrey was an honest man, and he swore as best he could that this couldn't possibly happen because it was directly against the words of the bill. That is, of course, precisely what happened. Oh, and by the way, these days, to maintain that a piece of legislation or that the Constitution means exactly what it says, remember John Roberts? That is a violation of the law, you see. That the law really means what the administrator says it means, neither more nor less. Now, this is, the ruling class has taught us to accept it. John Roberts, appointee of a Republican president, capital R. Well, they have also taught us, of course, and this, of course, is the most absurd thing of all. You may remember that the definition of absolute power given by Blackstone, who was the great commentator on English law, on whom all of the founders, who was really the educator of all of our founders in law, the definition that Blackstone gave of absolute power, there was the power to do anything not naturally impossible, such as turning a man into a woman. Well. Our ruling class has told us that turning a man into a woman, or vice versa, simply requires someone declaring that he is a man or a woman at any given moment. So today, Johnny can walk into the girls' room, and Mary can walk into the boys' room, and tomorrow they may do the opposite. And if you say otherwise, why you are, well, what are you? See, racist, sexist, homophobic, you name it. You know the litany. And we are supposed to simply accept that. Well, of course, the point is you don't have to, nor do you have to accept the contention that babies taken out of the womb screaming are simply fetuses to be, well, to be what? To be custom slaughtered for parts. Who says so? They say so. And if you don't accept it, you are, and the litany, you know the litany perfectly well. Well, my point is, of course, that you do not have to. So, my final point, what can we do about all of this? Well, one thing that we can all do is what Solzhenitsyn advised the Soviet people to do for the first requirement of freedom. That's to say, you may do what you wish, but I will not be part of it. I will not agree. I will not say that you are right. I will not agree that you are right. I will say that you are wrong. I will not ask you to tolerate me. Because, of course, the moment you ask someone to tolerate you, you are conceding their right to do so. But we are not asking to be tolerated. We are demanding, we are exercising the right to speak the truth to ourselves and to everybody else. So speak the truth and argue. Some of you saw, or certainly have heard about, what Ted Cruz did to the head of the Sierra Club when he testified before Cruz's subcommittee. He simply showed that the man did not know the first thing about the entire global warming controversy on which he testified. He simply did not know the facts, could not argue the evidence, and that really is rather easy to do, but it carries a price. First of all, the first part of the price is you have to know what you're talking about. You got to learn what you're talking about, which is something that the Heartland Institute can darn well help you to do, not only with regard to global warming, but with regard to a whole bunch of other things. There are other institutes, the Family Research Council, the pro-life organizations, the various tax limitation organizations, et cetera, the Club for Growth, that will give you all sorts of valuable information, all sorts of facts, all sorts of access to the truth, and who have organized and who are organizing, as Joe Bass is doing, parts of the population with regard to parts of the public agenda. Now, there are really, I now have precisely 4 minutes left. Joe is quite tyrannical. I've got to speak for precisely 30 minutes. There are two things to be done in this regard. One of them, the easier of the two, is strictly political. Look, the ruling class is in the process of being massively rejected by the American people. And why not? All they've done is lose every war they've engaged in. They have made life worse for the people in general, although they've made it noticeably much better for their own. They have made the American people feel uneasy and unfree. political correctness is impinging on how we deal with one another every day. We hardly know with whom we can safely speak frankly. This is a terribly un-American thing that has happened to us. And we Americans resent it. Even people on the left are beginning to resent it. And so the news all around you is that both on the right and on the left, there's a massive rejection of the ruling class. Where this will go, only God knows. But if it is up to us in this fluid time to attempt to steer it, and it is not impossible that we will in fact have a Congress and a president that have been elected, will have been elected, pledged to counter this ruling class, to cut down the size of government, to institute reforms here and there. Which ones they will choose to institute, at this point, God only knows. But the political problem is relatively easy to deal with. Far more difficult and ultimately far more important is a social problem that only we as citizens can deal with, and that is to take back our lives where they matter most, and that is right next to us. School education, forgive me for focusing on education, this has been my life's business. I cannot tell you how much, to what degree I have seen the quality of incoming freshmen decline. They know less, they can think, their ability to think is much reduced. Why? Well, because of the schools that they've attended, schools run by unions, et cetera, et cetera. Schools, above all, that are not under control of parents. How are schools to be returned to control of parents? Well, of course, you know about voucherization, which is a very fine thing. But that still would not allow parental control because schools are way too big. In 1940, when this country was half its size, it had 115,000 school districts. Today it has 15,000. Yeah. In order for us to have the same opportunity for parental control, we would have to have 6 times as many school districts as we have right now. How do we do that? Well, not easily, but we cannot do it. We can only do it if we demand that it be done locally. Will this be easy? Absolutely not. Billions, in fact, perhaps certainly over $1 trillion has been invested in building these huge schools, which above all professionalize education and make it irresponsible, non-responsible. You know, that bullet will have to be bitten. It is only one of many bullets that have to be bitten. Joe and I were talking about how to reduce government in size and how that has to be done all at once, et cetera, et cetera. However, all of these are technical, but what is not technical, what is most essential, is the willingness of parents, the willingness of people like yourselves to become volunteer firemen, to support volunteer fire departments, to reduce the size of government, reduce the scope of government so that it can be managed, so that it is not run by the experts, the professionals who look down upon you. There is only one way to remedy that, and that is to do it yourself. And doing things yourself is onerous. It actually takes getting to know people. I will end with this little story. What does it mean to do things yourself? Well, the day after flights resumed after 9/11, flights were canceled in America for 4 or 5 days. One of the first flights that took off, the captain came over the public address system and said, "Hello, my name is Captain Jones, and I'm here to tell you that there isn't going to be any hijacking on this airplane. And I'm here to tell you who's going to prevent it. You. I want you to turn to your right and turn to your left and introduce yourself to the person next to you. And to agree with him that there isn't going to be any hijacking on this flight." Thank you.